Hi, everybody. It's me. I am going to be reading Gordon Corman, his trilogy Island, and the first book is called Shipwreck. So we tried to read it this morning on Zoom. Wasn't great. So I'm recording this now so I can put it into Seesaw for you guys so you guys can listen to it. So Prologue, Saturday, July 15th. For a heart-stopping moment, the bow of the Phoenix pointed straight up at the boiling black clouds of the storm. Then the wave broke in a cascade of spray, and the schooner was headed down, plummeting into the trough. Shakily, she righted herself and began the long climb up the next 30-footer. A streak of forked lightning silhouetted her against white water. She was two-masted, small for a schooner. Her deck wasn't much longer than the tallest of the waves. Her sails were down and secured, and she moved under engine power, steered gamely into the oncoming seas. Suddenly, a flash of light. The mainsail began to rise. It was unthinkable. No vessel could survive such a storm-carrying sail. Pandemonium, angry shouts from the deck, a desperate run for the halyard. Then the brutal power of the storm filled the half-open sail with violent wind. This ship spun around and heeled over, its twin masts dipping dangerously close to the punishing swells. The next wave took the Phoenix broadside. A torrent washed over the deck. There might have been a scream when the body hit the water, but the howling of the gale was all that could be heard. Chapter 1, Sunday, July 9th. Luke Haggerty squeezed into the tiny bathroom and pulled the door shut behind him. No, not the bathroom, he reminded himself, the head. Luke knew he'd been sentenced to this boat for the next month. What he didn't know that it was going to be a never-ending vocabulary lesson. Not walls, bulkheads. Not beds, berths. The kitchen was a galley. A room was a cabin. And who cared? Sudden pounding on the door. Was it still called a door? What are we doing? What are you doing in there? Growled the voice of Mr. Radford, the Phoenix's first mate. Writing an opera? Let's go, Archie. Luke reached for his belt and bashed his elbow against the sink. This bathroom head was a shoebox. Ow! More pounding. You okay, Archie? My name is Luke. Even as he said it, he knew it was a waste of breath. All the way from the Guam airport to the marina, Radford had leaned over the horn and cursed out Archie, the truck driver, Archie the cop, Archie the pedestrian, Archie the cyclist, and even Archie the priest. By pressing himself into the corner and resting his left hip against the sink, Luke managed to finish up in the head. He hesitated. The flusher was some kind of pump. Instructions were scribbled on a plastic-coated card tacked to the wall. Bulkhead. Open valve, pump 3 times. Close valve, pump 3 times. Duck. Duck? Why duck? Wham! He smacked his head on the low doorway on the way out. Watch your head, grunted the mate. Better late than never. Did you remember to close the valve? Luke nodded. What's the big deal? The head flushes with seawater. Last thing you want to do on a boat is let the sea on board. That's a one-way ticket to the bottom. Luke felt queasy. Ever since he learned he was coming here, his uneasy dreams had been a catalog of all the ways to die at sea. Hurricanes, tidal waves, giant sharks, and collisions with supertankers, just to name a few. Now he had to add toilets to his list of things to worry about. Okay, he sighed. Where's my cabin? Radford brayed a laugh. You're standing in it, Archie. Oops. Sorry about that. But this is just his voice trailed off. He had been about to say the hallway outside the bathroom, but in the dim light, he could make out 4 narrow bunk berths, 2 on either end, and 2 mini dressers, all built right into the bulkhead. These are your quarters. Quarters, Luke replied, as in quarter of a room? This ain't a luxury liner, Mr. Radford shrugged. Archie Archie, meet Archie. Lights out at 2200. He heaved himself up the companionway out onto the deck. Luke cast his eyes around. A tousled head of sandy hair poked out from one of the upper bunks. What time is it? Sleepy eyes peered down over rounded, heavily freckled cheeks. 21:45, Luke replied. I think that's at 22. The boy groaned and yawned at the same time. My system is totally messed up. I was on planes for 21 hours to get here. Tell me about it, said Luke, beginning to fill a narrow drawer with the contents of his duffel bag. Why Guam? It's supposed to be just us and the ocean, replied the other boy. No ports, no nothing. The brochure said we probably won't even see another boat for the whole month. He sounded mournful, like it was a death sentence. Luke applied the brochure. Really? I was surprised. How'd you end up here? The horrible movie replied. The crack of the judge's gavel, that single word, guilty, his mother's tears, and later in the judge's chambers. I'm reluctant to sentence a 13-year-old to Wilston, especially on a first offense. There is one other possibility. It's a program called CNC, Charting a New Course. Luke cast his roommate a strange smile. I'm a convicted felon. He held out his hand. Luke Haggerty. Wow. The boy's eyes widened. I'm only here because I fight with my sister. I'm Will, he added, shaking hands. Will Greenfield. Fight with your sister? Luke raised an eyebrow. So your parents had to put an ocean between you two? Nah, she's in the girls' cabin next door. I guarantee you'll hate her. I should have been an only child. Luke laughed shortly. I am an only child. It doesn't help. If you don't have any brothers or sisters, your parents are on your case extra. The lights flashed once and winked out. Except for the dim glow from the porthole, the cabin was in total darkness. Well, I guess I've decided to go to sleep, Luke said sarcastically. He established himself on the lower bed, berth, on the opposite side of the room. Uncomfortably, he curled up in the coolest spot he could find. It's funny because Luke is having a hard time remembering all of the terminology. So a bed is called a berth. So hopefully you'll be learning some of these terms as well. For a few minutes, the only sound that could be heard was a creaking of the mooring lines and the soft lapping of water against the hull. Then, what felony? Will asked. Luke laughed without humor. Not murder, if that's what you're worried about. But even as he said it, the voice of the prosecutor was ringing in his ears. Felony possession of a firearm. Come on, coaxed Will. I told you why I'm here. What was it? Breaking and entering? Vandalism? I know. Assault. That'll be my next felon, yawned Luke, if I ever get my hands on the kid who put that gun in my locker. So now you know why Luke is there, seems to me. Chapter 2, Monday, July 10th, 0800, 20 hours. Captain James Cascaden had a rugged, leathery face that looked like it had been rubbed against every coral reef in the 7 seas. He was 6'5", so he had to duck through the tiny hatches and companionways of the Phoenix. But the movement was so natural, almost graceful, that Luke had the impression that the man had been born and lived his entire 60-plus years on boats like this one. Captain Cascaden hated long speeches, except when he was the person giving them. None of you came to me because you want to learn the ways of the sea. His voice was a deep bass with a rich tone of bassoon. Many of you are from troubled backgrounds, some including difficulties with the law. A flash of penetrating eyes. Aboard this ship, all that means nothing. The slate is clean. I don't care about who you are now. All that matters is who you will be. A crew. My crew. And together we will serve this vessel. Join me, and we will sail off to adventure. Like I've got a choice, Luke mumbled under his breath. Mr. Radford was there to keep the audience in line. Shut up, Archie. When the captain talks, only the captain is talking. The first adventure turned out to be swabbing the deck. Luke found himself mopping and fuming. Only 3 of the 6 crew members had arrived for the trip. How fair was it for half of the people to do all the work? Sounds familiar. He slaved alongside Will, listening to his bunkmate bicker and his sister Lisa. Lissa? I'm not sure how Miss Smith was saying that today. Why are you mopping there? I already did that part. Yeah, that's why it needs doing again. Luke smiled in spite of himself. Will and Lissa were such opposites of each other that it almost made sense that they didn't get along. He was husky, she was skinny. His face was round, hers was angular. His eyes seldom left the deck and the job at hand. She seemed bright and fascinated by everything that was going on around her. She watched the captain and Radford, and even Luke, with a friendly interest. I hear you're a felon, she says cheerfully. Luke's face flamed red. The Greenfields may have hated each other, but they obviously didn't mind sharing a little gossip. It's a long story, he muttered. We almost got a criminal record once, she went on, but our lawyer got the charges dropped when we promised not to do it again. Hey, Mr. Radford called out from partway up the mast, where he was adjusting some rigging. Less talk and more work, Archie. Same to you, Veronica. Well, that explained where the names came from. Mr. Radford was a reader of fine literature, comics. Luke turned back to where brother and sister were snapping at each other. This family was some piece of work. Real funny to joke about criminal records to a guy who had one that would never go away. Like you could get arrested for sibling squabbles. Anyway, what kind of nutjob parents would send their kids halfway around the world just because they argue like every other brother and sister on the planet? And then it happened. 1 second they were bickering. The next, Lissa cocked back her mop and took a home run swing at her brother's head, missing by half an inch. It was that fast. Luke blinked and almost missed it. In a split second, Radford was out of the rigging and poised between them. If you want to kill each other, don't do it on my watch. Where was I? I just lost my... Oh. And then they were back to the work as if nothing had happened. Maniacs, thought Luke. I'm surrounded by maniacs. The job of swabbing was short, if not sweet. For a 60-foot boat, there was practically nowhere to stand on the Phoenix. The whole center of the vessel housed the system of sails and masts, booms, lines, and rigging that supported it. The cockpit and main cabin took up most of the aft space. The sleeping quarters dominated the forward part of the boat, with the galley and the cargo hatch toward the middle, amidships. So all that was left to walk on was a thin path of deck ringing the schooner and a couple of very tight cut-throughs between the masts. Equipment was piled on every surface. Poles, fenders, anchors, the Phoenix's 12-foot dinghy, and what seemed like enough rope to stretch across any ocean. In a way, it was brilliant, Luke thought. There was room for everything except people. Surely even Wollaston provided more space for its inmates. An only child who had never shared a bedroom, he could almost feel the squeeze in his gut. The idea of living on this floating sardine can made him shudder. In addition to being the first mate and the warden, Mr. Radford was also ship's cook. At lunch in the tiny galley, he proved that he could open a tin of baked beans as well as any of the great chefs of Europe. While cooking was the mate's job, cleaning up and washing dishes turned out to be just another part of the adventure. The galley was ventilated only by a small smoke head on the cabin top. It seemed twice as hot as the rest of the boat, as the rest of Guam for that matter. Luke and Will did the work in sweaty silence. Talking just didn't seem to be worth the effort. After lunch, Mr. Bradford headed to the airport to meet a plane, and the 3 crew members were given a tour of the cockpit. Now, what's the most important instrument in here? Asked Captain Cascaden. The wheel, suggested Will. Of course not, snapped Lissa testily. How about the radio? That's downstairs in the navigation room, stupid, Will snapped. Not downstairs, the captain amended. On shipboard, we say below. How about the compass? Suggested Lissa brightly. If her brother's constant attacks bothered her, she didn't show it. Probably, thought Luke, because she didn't have a mop in her hand. All those are important, the captain agreed, but his hand touched a small, ordinary-looking switch on the instrument panel. This is more important than all of them. This is the blower switch. It turns on the fan that airs out the engine room. Never, ever start the engine of a boat without starting the blower first. Otherwise, fuel vapors that have built up there could explode when the engine ignites. He stared at them with burning black eyes. If you forget everything else you learn here, remember that one thing. That turned out to be a favorite line of Captain Cascaden's, like when he told the group that a boat does not respond immediately to turn of the wheel. It's not like your bicycle that goes where you tell it when you tell it. An inexperienced helmsman will oversteer because he keeps on turning until he feels his ship change direction. If you forget everything else you learned here, remember that one thing. He also said it about storing ropes and lines in a coiled position to keep them straight and ready to use, tying the sails down in a storm, and even cleaning up the sleeping quarters. Captain Cascaden pointed ashore. Oh, look, there's Mr. Radford bringing us 2 more crew members. It's important to make the newcomers feel welcome. And if you forget everything else, whispered to Will. Will covered up a snicker with some coughing. The 2 new arrivals looked terrible, but a lot of that could have been the day-long flights. Charlotte Swan seemed to be about Luke's age. She was tall and rail-thin and moved like a cat. There was a no-nonsense look to her. Her hair was plain, her clothes were simple. Her appearance was engineered for efficiency rather than show. Ian Sikorsky was at least a couple of years younger. The slight boy with sad eyes was already embroiled in a battle with Radford over his luggage. The mate had removed a sleek laptop computer with modem, and Ian seemed ready to try to swim home rather than to part with it. Soon the captain himself got in the middle of it. This is about casting off your old life for a new and better one. But what about the internet? The boy asked. We have our own internet here, Cascaden assured him. It's called teamwork. A ship and her crew coming together to form a web of comradeship and cooperation. What electronic gadget could give you that? Radford put it less poetically. No computers, Archie. CNC rules. It goes home UPS. PDQ. Ian looked so miserable that he barely raised his head as he walked up the gangway onto the deck. Hey, Ian, Luke said kindly. When you see our room, you'll be happy it had to go. We need all the space we can get. Well, Mr. Radford, Captain Cascaden said cheerfully. That's the whole load then? One more, Skipper, the mate replied. The captain frowned. Now, how could that be? There aren't any more flights due in. This isn't your regular Archie, said Radford. This kid's coming by private jet. So, I wonder who the new kid's going to be coming in on a private jet. Says a little bit about him, maybe. So, hopefully you enjoyed that. I will be reading again. So, I will see you later.